Wind clawed at the cedar rails as Hannah Cole pressed her palm against the general store's door. A lantern burned inside, orange light spilling through dust-flecked glass. Jonah, her 12-year-old, huddled by her skirt, knuckles white on the worn wood. Little Levi peered up, his round eyes bright with hunger and hope. Across the boardwalk, the sign swayed on a nail. Cook wanted, no questions asked. Lonely Ridge Ranch. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've got something extra special saved just for you. Hannah's heart thudded like a mule's hoof. Widow's desperation hollered in her ears. Their pa had died 2 winters back. Fever claiming him in a snowdrift, leaving her to scrape coin from the bones of debt. Jonah swallowed hard. He'd earned pounds of bacon in town, but not enough to stave off the creditors. Levi shifted, his small boot tracing a crack in the floorboard. Hannah curved her hand around his shoulder, stiff as wind-whipped grain. "This is our chance," she whispered. Jonah drew a ragged breath. "If they feed us, Ma." He let the sentence hang. She nodded, fisting her apron. "They will." At first light, they climbed into buckboard, Hannah settling Levi against a coil of rope, Jonah gripping the wooden rail. She cracked the reins and the mare lurched forward, hooves churning dust into sunrise. Behind them, the general store's porch faded into morning haze. Out here, the plains yawned wide and empty, sagebrush wavering like ghosts. Mile after mile passed under the wagon's wheel treads, each a promise and a prayer. Jonah counted clouds. Levi traced spiders weaving dew across fence wire. Hannah stared straight ahead, jaw set in quiet resolve. By noontime, the Lonely Ridge Ranch emerged, a gaunt silhouette against cobalt sky. Corrals wrapped low hills and old cedar posts, and cattle stamped in dusty pens. A pine and stone cabin squatted on the rise, smoke drifting from its chimney like a crooked finger. Hannah guided the mare across churned earth and reined in at a broad porch where a man stood, hat shadowing his face. His coat hung heavy on his shoulders. His boots were polished but streaked with rain. She climbed down, Levi at her hand, Jonah at her side, and the mare's exhale echoed in the hush. The man tipped his head, eyes like chipped flint. "You the cook?" he asked, voice low and measured. Hannah squared her spine. "Yes, sir." She laid a sack of flour at his feet and placed Levi in Jonah's arms. "I have 2 sons." She lifted her chin against both need and pride. The man's jaw ticked. He studied the flour, the boys, the stains on Hannah's sleeves. Then he nodded once. "Come inside." Inside, the hearth lay cold as river rock. Oil lamps hung from hooks along the plank walls, their wicks blackened by neglect. A cast-iron skillet sat on the stove, crusted with last month's grease. The man, Caleb Ward, set down a battered coffee pot and motioned to a battered chair, set the water to boil, flour and lard in the pantry. His gaze lingered on her hands. "And boy, fetch that pail of water." He handed Levi a tin pail, the boy's small shoulders squared with purpose. Hannah moved with familiar grace. She filled the kettle, slid the skillet onto the stove's hot plate, and coaxed flame beneath it. Jonah tugged the flour sack open, flour dust drifting like ghosts in the lantern glow. She cracked eggs into the skillet, the sizzle a tentative welcome. Levi scooped flour into a bowl, and Jonah stirred. Caleb watched them work, eyes narrowing as he leaned against a rough-hewn post. Hannah ladled steaming mush into 3 bowls and set them on the table. Heavy pine boards scuffed by years of bear claws and bridle bits. They ate in silence, save for Levi's soft slurps and Jonah's discreet chewing. Hannah pressed a cloth to her face, tasting salt and oil and the faint warmth of belonging. Caleb sipped coffee black as midnight, watching her. Flames flickered shadows across his face, carving lines you'd only see in candlelight. He set the pot aside and reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a tarnished locket. He opened it, eyes fixed on the empty frame. Hannah's breath caught. He'd never spoken of grief, Yet here was its token. He closed the locket with a deliberate click and pocketed it. "You start tomorrow," he said, voice barely above the stove's hiss. "Boys, sleep in the bunkhouse. You in the cabin." Hannah nodded, chest tight with relief. She glanced at the door window, where the sun tipped beyond the ridge. "Thank you, Mr. Ward." Jonah and Levi echoed the thanks in small voices. That night, Hannah tucked her sons into the narrow bunk straw mattress, the cabin's walls creaking with settling timbers. Outside, wind rattled shutters like rattlers on flatstone. She laid the quilt, stitched from her sister's shirts. Over the boys, each square a memory of a childhood home now lost. A lantern dangled at the door. Its glow split shadows across the cedar floor. In the corner, a heavy chest stood locked, iron straps gleaming in the light. She pressed a hand to her breast, remembering sister's promise. Protect them, no matter what. A step sounded on the porch, soft but deliberate. Hannah's heart tapped like hoofbeats on hard ground. She hushed the boys and crept to the window, drawing curtains aside. Moonlight washed the planks. A solitary rider sat silent on his mount, face shadowed by brim. He carried no lamp, only the hush of distant thunder. Hannah's breath froze. She closed the curtains, pressing her back against the wall, as the rider's silhouette ghosted across the lantern glimmer at the door. A sharp rap echoed on the wood. Hannah's pulse pounded. She stepped to the door, hand open but trembling on the latch. Outside, no ridge lights flickered. Only the rider's boots paused in the dark. A cool wind slipped beneath the door. The lantern's flames shivered. Hannah swallowed and whispered her sons' names. Jonah stirred. Levi's breath quickened. She met the dark frame with steady eyes, bracing for a revelation that might crack their fragile peace. Lantern light trembled on the cabin wall as Hannah Cole pressed her palm against the door's rough plank. Outside, hoofbeats had vanished into night wind, leaving only a lone rider's silhouette etched against cedar rails. Frost clinged to her eyelashes as she opened the door a crack, heart hammering in her ribs. No one stood there, only boot prints in soft mud and the faint scuff of spurs. Hannah swallowed, recalling her husband's last warning, never trust a shadow. She eased back inside, closing the door against the chill, resolve stealing in her spine. In the hearth's glow, Jonah sat cross-legged by the stove, polishing tack with careful strokes. Calf leather squeaked under his cloth. Levi lay curled on a patchwork quilt, eyes heavy but restless in sleep. Hannah filled a chipped tin cup with water and tested it on her wrist, then offered it to Jonah. He nodded, taking the cup with practiced calm, then rose to fetch oats from a battered sack. Hannah watched him, stoic and sure beyond his 12 years. She pressed her hand to his shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered, voice hushed as a prayer. By dawn's pale edge, steam curled from a cast-iron kettle. Hannah ladled porridge into bowls, each spoonful warm as mercy. Levi stirred in his corner, small arms stretching toward the bowl's rim. He gurgled with need, and Hannah scooped him into her lap, feeding him by small spoonfuls. His eyes locked on hers, bright pools of trust. Each soft slurp fortified her heart against doubt. In the next room, Caleb Ward appeared at the kitchen threshold. His coat hung heavy on broad shoulders. His hat cast a shadow over tired eyes. He said nothing, but the smoky tension in his posture laced a silence. Hannah set a bowl before Caleb and another before Jonah at the rough-hewn table. She drew a ragged chair for herself, seating Levi on her knee. The cabin's logs creaked as they settled into breakfast, wind rattling shutters, cattle lowing in distant pens. Caleb took a slow bite, eyes distant. Hannah watched pale wisps of memory drift behind his stare, perhaps a smile shared with a long-lost wife, or laughter hushed by gunfire on a dusty street. She braced herself to speak, but Caleb only tipped his mug in acknowledgement before rising and shouldering outside. Jonah pressed his lips together, spoon hovering. He followed Caleb's retreat, curiosity sharpening his eyes. Levi's small hand clutched Hannah's finger, a tether to keep her grounded. She swallowed fear and rose, guiding her son toward chores. The door's rough edge pressed cool against her back. She drew breath and stepped outside, where frosty air bit at her cheeks. Caleb knelt by the corral gate, inspecting a broken latch. He glanced up as Jonah approached, then nodded him forward. "Give me the hammer," he said, voice low. Jonah handed over the tool with steady hands. Caleb twisted the latch free and jammed in a fresh pin, each motion precise as a brand iron's burn. "Ranch hands left in panic last month," he said without turning. "Had to do it myself." His voice held no bitterness, only tacit burden. Hannah leaned on the fence rail, quilted shawl slipping from her shoulder. She recalled her own husband's words before fever claimed him. "Keep the doors closed against ghosts." She touched the shawl's worn edge, her sister's last gift, and felt both promise and grief coil in her chest. By mid-morning, the sky threatened rain. Clouds rolled across the plains like folding cloth. Hannah led Levi to the barn to gather eggs from nesting hens. Clucking hens lurked among straw, pale yolks glinting in her basket. Levi tiptoed beside her, wide-eyed at each feathered rustle. Jonah emerged from the corral, dusted in gray, a bucket of oats balanced on his arm. He set the oats before the horses, coaxing their muzzles into troughs. Caleb stood behind him, hand on Jonah's shoulder. In that simple act of trust, Hannah saw the seeds of a chosen family taking root. Inside the cabin, the wind rattled the window panes. Hannah stirred stew in a battered pot, its savory scent mingling with damp cedar. She glanced at the locked chest in the corner, lid bound by heavy iron. The chest held Caleb's secrets, his past sins or war scars. Yesterday he'd opened it just long enough to remove a pistol cleaned and oiled with meticulous care. She felt the chest weight across the room, its lock a barrier between trust and truth. Hannah drew a breath and set a bowl of stew before him. Caleb looked up, surprise flickering before he bowed his head in thanks. "Good," he said, voice gravelly. "Keeps me warm." He lingered over the stew, chewing slowly. The cabin's single lamp cast amber circles around his face. Hannah watched flickering reflections in his eyes, shadows of memory and regret. A gust rattled the eaves, and she shivered despite the pot's heat. She crossed to the door and slammed it against wind's howl, then returned to stoke embers beneath the stove. Levi tugged her apron, pointing toward a folded note pinned to the door jamb. Hannah unfolded the paper, fingers trembling. The handwriting was sharp and unfamiliar. "Ward, settle your debts or lose your ridge. We ride at full moon." Her breath stilled. The note's edges bore the crest of a distant creditor, not local outlaws. Caleb appeared behind her, shoulders stiff. Hannah handed him the note. He read it with slow gravity. "They think I'll fold," he said. "They'll learn." He tucked the note into his coat and stared out the window at darkening sky. That afternoon, a wagon clattered down the lane. A neighbor, Mrs. Perkins, the storekeeper, stepped out, basket in hand. Her apron bore flour smudges and empathy's lines. "I heard about your debt," she said, voice gentle. She set the basket on the porch rail. A week's worth of supplies, beans, coffee, candles. "Thought you might need it." Hannah clasped her hands around the basket's edge, tears sparking behind her eyes. Mrs. Perkins edged closer, gaze flickering to the baby sleeping in Hannah's arms. "We look out for our own," she whispered, placing a heavy blanket over Levi's shawl. "No one stands alone." As dusk fell, thunder rolled on distant hills. Jonah and Levin huddled in the bunkhouse under the new blanket, eyes bright with wonder and fear. Caleb and Hannah walked the corral, checking each gate and fence post. Rain began to spit, misting their coats. Caleb paused beside a solitary tree, a leaning cedar scarred by past storms. He pressed a hand to its rough bark, as if drawing strength from its roots. Hannah touched his arm, lightning splitting the sky in silver arcs. "We protect them," she whispered. He nodded, voice low as driftwood. Together, in the final glow of lantern light, Hannah hung the quilt over a chair back, the the rose patch a beacon of love's endurance. She pressed her cheek to the faded cloth, breathing in the memory of sister's laughter. Outside, wind clawed at shutters and rain pattered on tin roof. But inside, a fragile warmth held fast. Hannah crossed to the locked chest and ran her fingers across its iron latch, sensing Caleb's secret seal within. She met his shadowed gaze across the room, unspoken understanding passing between them. A sudden knock shattered the quiet, sharp and urgent. Jonah stiffened in the doorway, Levi's small face peeking behind his leg. Hannah's heart seized. Caleb reached for his pistol, stepping toward the door. Hannah placed herself between him and the boys, voice steady as steel. Not tonight. The knock came again, measured and relentless. Through the wood, they heard a familiar drawl. "Ward, open up." Rain beat against the door as dawn's promise lay hours away. In the hush before confrontation, Hannah clutched her sons close and braced for the next storm. Whatever truths Caleb carried, they would face it together. Rain spat against the door as Loki Drake's boot heel clicked on the porch plank. Hannah pressed her palm to the wood, lantern flame flickering behind her. The door swung inward on splintered hinges, revealing Drake's rain-dark coat and a ledger bound in cracked leather. Water dripped from his wide-brimmed hat. Hannah, stared into eyes the color of bruised sky, heart hammering in her chest. She gripped the quilt's rose patch and braced for the next storm. Caleb Ward stood behind her, shoulders squared against the downpour, his jaw clenched like a trap, snapping shut. He slid a hand toward the locked chest in the corner, its iron bars throbbing with past sins. Drake's gaze flicked to the chest, then back to Caleb's rifle at the hearth. "Ward," he said, voice low as rolling thunder. "Caldwell's owed 10,000 by full moon. I'm his collection." The ledger thumped on the table, wet edges curling. Hannah's chest tightened. $10,000, a sum beyond her scrimped pennies or Caleb's monthly profits. She felt Levi press against her leg, small hand gripping her skirt. Jonah stood behind the cook stove, stood on his cheeks, each breath steady as a colt's first steps. Hannah's maternal resolve drew her forward. "We'll manage," she said, voice firm though rain soaked through her shawl. Drake's lips curled in half-smile. "That's what I'm paid to hear." Drake flipped the ledger open and tapped a line dated 3 years past. Caleb's signature in spidery script. "Your promise, then," Drake muttered. "You kept running, Ward. Now I run you down." Thunder rolled behind his words. Caleb's eyes narrowed. He squared his shoulders. "You've come for trouble, not business." Rain sluiced off Drake's coat. "Doesn't matter," Drake said. "Caldwell wants ridge or ruin." He closed the ledger and turned away, boots dripping on the floor. Inside, Hannah's memory rippled. Her sister's last letter, written by candlelight, promising hearth and forgiveness if danger came. She had tucked that letter beneath her pillow, a talisman against despair. Now that promise pulsed in her veins, urging courage. She pressed a knuckle to her lips and let the memory steady her nerves. Levi nestled his head against the quilt's rose patch, cooing softly. His innocence was her compass through the storm. Jonah emerged from behind the stove, soot smudging his brow. "Ma," he said quietly, stepping to Caleb's side. His hand hovered near the rifle. "Let me help." Caleb nodded, placing a guiding hand on Jonah's shoulder. "Stay close," he whispered. Jonah squared his jaw, eyes reflecting lantern glow. He slipped outside, wrench in hand, heading toward the broken fence gate. Hannah watched him go, pride and fear knotting her throat. Levi's small cry drew her back inside. He reached for the quilt's edge, grasping the rose-patch fabric with pudgy fingers. Hannah knelt and brushed his hair from his eyes, voice soft as curled smoke. "You're safe," she murmured. He gurgled in reply, hope woven through his tone. In that gesture, child clutching claws stained with memory, Hannah found her purpose. Protect this boy as fiercely as her sister once protected her. A slow knock rattled the barn door. Tom Baxter, the ranch hand, stood dripping on the porch. His face was lined by wind and worry. He carried a crate of nails and fresh wire. "Storm's torn the south corral," he said, voice rough. "Must have been prowlers." He glanced at Drake's departed shape beyond the door. Saw tracks near the creek, too. Hannah rose, lantern in hand, and followed him to the barn. Rain pelted the corral's timbers, splintering infested rails in the storm's rage. Jonah knelt amid the wreckage, knotting wire around a warped post. His sleeves were sodden, his face set in determination. Tom worked beside him, hammering nails into boards. Hannah and Caleb arrived with lantern light, surveying the scene. "They test us," Caleb said, voice low. Hannah touched his arm. "We hold." The corral gate creaked as if echoing their vow. Inside the cabin, Caleb opened the chest by candle glow, drawing the pistol he'd cleaned for years. Its metal glinted like regret. He set it on the table and slid the chest close, whisking the key into his coat pocket. Hannah watched the gesture, recognizing his need to stand ready. She crossed the stove and stirred stew thick with beans, the aroma of fragile calm in a brewing storm. Jonah returned with Tom's help, hands raw from wire and wood. He sank onto a crate, breath heaving. "They'll come back," he said, staring at the tracks splashed in mud. Caleb knelt to his level, voice soft as dust on wind. "Then we'll face them." He pressed a bandage into Jonah's hand, fresh from his own wound. Jonah's eyes flickered with understanding. He nodded once, resolve sharpening his youth. Levi found a scrap of paper pinned behind the door jamb, a second note offering mercy if Caleb left by nightfall. Hannah unfolded it, fingers trembling over its jagged script. "You run dagger to my back." It read, "Or I take ridge by right." Her breath caught. She folded it and met Caleb's gaze. He pocketed it without a word. Outside, rain thundered on tin roof, and windows streaked with ghostly rivulets. That evening, Hannah sat by the hearth, quilt draped across her knees. She traced Helen's stitches, recalling laughter shared under oak leaves. Helen had pressed a hand to her heart and said, "Your family will find light." Hannah inhaled cedar smoke and dust, letting memory kindle hope. She looked at Caleb's locket on the mantel, its empty frame a silent echo of love lost. She pressed her palm to the wood grain, roots of memory and promise tangled beneath her fingers. Night deepened, and Caleb stepped outside to scan the ridge. Hannah followed, quilt around her shoulders, Levi in her arms. Jonah lingered at the door, eyes wide with vigil. Past the fence, silhouettes of outlaws crouched among sagebrush, black shapes against thunder's hush. Caleb raised his rifle, finger poised. Hannah held Levi close, breath held between storm and stand. In that charged stillness, mother, father, son, bound by loss and loyalty, they met shadows challenged with unwavering glare. Lightning split sky, and thunder cracked. A rider emerged from the ridge, rain-slick horse's coat shining like oil. He reined in as dust-slick hoofbeats faded into silence. Hannah's heart pounded like castanets on wind-stung hills. Caleb's stance was steel, rifle christening anticipation in his grip. Jonah stepped from the door, pistol drawn. Levi pressed against Hannah's chest, small heartbeat anchoring them all. The rider raised a gloved hand, voice ragged as split timber. "Ward, this isn't over." Hannah swallowed fear like bitter coffee. Caleb exhaled, tension coiling around his eyes. The rider's horse stamped a challenge. Thunder echoed behind him. Jonah's jaw set. Levi's fingers twined in the quilt's rose patch. In that moment of charged breath, the ranch's fate teetered between past debts and chosen bonds. Families standing together against storm and shadow. Rain sluiced across cedar boards as dawn bled into the sky. Caleb Ward stood at the corral gate, rifle leveled at the ridge where 3 riders ghosted through mist. The rain spat like broken glass, each droplet hissing on iron. Jonah crouched behind him, leather-gloved hand tightening on a remnant of fence wire turned makeshift snare. Hannah pressed Levi close beneath her shawl, quilt wrapped around both boys like battle flags. The world beyond the ranch blurred in gray, but inside each heartbeat crackled with resolve. They would defend this ridge as fiercely as bloodkin. Caleb lowered his rifle and scanned the rain-drenched plains. He mouthed a silent vow to the locket at his throat. No storm, no ledger, no past debt would claim this home. He turned to Jonah. "Gate's your watch," he said, voice gravel and promise. Jonah nodded, jaw set against wind's roar. He slipped around the gate, boots sinking in mud, and sank behind the rail. Levi's eyes flicked wide beneath Hannah's bonnet. He clutched the quilt's rose patch, small fist trembling with hope. Hannah crouched beside him, voice soft as steel. "Stay low, son." They fortified the cabin's door with a length of iron bar Caleb lifted from the shed. The door groaned under his hand as he slid the bar through iron loops carved into wood. Each twist of the bolt pressed him deeper into defense. Hannah held the lantern high, its flame flickering across splintered boards. Water beaded on glass, and shadows marched across her face, grief and determination intertwined. She met Caleb's gaze, crusted with rain and regret, and saw the faint spark of trust she had sown into this place with oatmeal and oil lamps. Morning chores lay undone, hay strewn across the stall floor, oats damp from the storm's breath. Jonah and Tom Baxter, the ranch hand, emerged from the barn, hands chapped by rope and wood. Together they reset the trough slats, levers soaked in mud, each strike of hammer a battle hymn. Levi scrambled to help, offering nails in his small palm. Jonah guided his brother's hand, stoic encouragement in his tone. The younger boy's eyes danced with gratitude as they passed him the final nail. In that moment, Hannah saw both sons become guardians of a new family. By midday, clouds fractured and sky flickered blue. Mrs. Perkins creaked down the lane in her buckboard, apron dusted by errands and empathy. She carried a crate of ammunition and a sealed envelope stamped with Caldwell's crest. "Thought you might need these," she said, setting the crate on the porch rail. Her eyes, soft as dawn mist, flicked to the quilt draped over Hannah's shoulders. "Neighbors, we stand behind you." She pressed a hand to Hannah's arm, then tipped her bonnet and urged her horses on. The crate clattered as she departed, leaving echoing hope in her wake. Inside, Caleb opened the locked chest on the floor. He extracted a leather-bound ledger, its pages yellowed with burden. A slip of paper fell, a promissory note from Caldwell's bank, dated years past, promising sale of the ranch if payments failed. He read it with heavy breath, recalling the venture that soured. Cattle lost in flood, creditors circling like vultures. He closed the chest and slid the key into his coat. He felt Hannah's gaze on him, worry woven through her features. He offered a rare nod. "This ridge was my debt's mantle. I wore it until now." Hannah turned the envelope over. She withdrew a slip of paper, a court summons ordering sale by twilight. She pressed the paper flat against her palm and inhaled cedar smoke. A memory bloomed. Her late husband's final letter, carried by a stagecoach, promising safe passage for his family if danger came. He had enclosed a coin stamped with their homeland's crest. Hannah fingered the quilt's rose patch, sewn from the same cloth she used to wrap Levi that night. The promise now fell on her: protect this home, keep her son safe. Jonah emerged from the corral, rifle in hand, face set like iron. "Tracks, Ma," he said, voice rough with moisture. "Not theirs." He pointed to muddy prints crossing the yard, wide space like the hooves of hired guns. Hannah swallowed the dread at her throat. Levi clung to her skirt, his breath quick. Hannah placed a steady hand on his hair. "We will face them," she whispered. She looked at Caleb, whose posture braced against a ridge. His eyes held hers, promise and pain echoing in their depths. Caleb led them to the barn loft, where oil lamps cast vertical bands of amber against rough-hewn beams. He set the pistol on a crate beside the lantern. Its barrel glinted like remorse. "If they breach gates," he said, voice steady as a brand iron, "we stand here." He drew a deep breath and recalled nights in campfire's glow, rifle at his side, comrades falling silent around him. Each life he could not save hammered in his chest like spent rounds. He drew strength from that regret. He would not fail his chosen family. As dusk cracked across the plains, thunder rolled from distant hills. Riders emerged, rifles slung, coats dark as elm bark. They fanned out across the ridge, equidistant threats under storm-lit sky. Jonah slipped from the loft, rifle raised, footsteps silent against hay-strewn floor. Levi pressed his cheek to Hannah's coat, small tears tracing his lashes. Hannah lifted him into her arms, heart clenched with ferocity. Caleb stepped forward, placing his body between family and shadow. He drew a pistol and offered a last look to Hannah. No turning back. Lightning split sky, and riders halted their approach. A whistle drifted across the plain. Caldwell's call to battle. Hannah braced Levi as the thunder rolled in leviathans. Jonah found his post at the corral gate, rifle resting on splintered boards. Caleb knelt to adjust a bolt on the cabin door. Each twist of his spurred his vow. Defend ridge, home, family. Above, rain began anew, spattering on lantern glass like broken beads. In that charged breath before conflict, Hannah pressed the quilt's rose patch to her face and whispered her sister's promise. We stand together. A voice rang clear across the yard. Ward, ready to answer for your promise? The creditor's second in command stepped forward, pistol aimed, mud dripping from his spurs. Caleb rose, rain-soaked coat, clinging to his frame. Hannah held Levi tight, voice firm as flint. We stand. The lantern flames trembled as gusts swept the ridge. Riders edged closer, each a specter of Caleb's past and her family's future. In that silent tableau, mother, father, sons united. They faced the storm's heart, vows forged in loss and love, ready for whatever dawn might bring. Gunfire cracked across the rain-slicked yard, bright as lightning against cedar posts. Caleb Ward crouched behind the cabin's low porch rail, rifle echoing in his hands. Hannah Cole knelt beside him, quilt draped across her shoulders, Levi tucked in her arms. Jonah stood guard at the corral gate, pistol leveled with a steadiness born of necessity. The creditor's men, Loki Drake and two hired guns, hovered in the storm's fringe, coats dark as oil and eyes cold with promise of ruin. Each heartbeat hammered like a war drum. This ridge would be their last stand. Caleb's finger hovered on the trigger as rain sluiced down his barrel's length. He whispered to Hannah, voice rough with resolve, show them proof. She inhaled Cedar's damp breath and lifted the leather ledger from the chest at her side. Its pages trembled in the storm's gale, ink smudged by years of regret. She thrust it forward, voice steady as flint. This ledger is paid in full. Caldwell's names are struck from these pages. Lightning flickered across Drake's face as he snatched the book and scanned the lines. Neighbors emerged from barns and cabins, silhouettes armed with rifles and torches. Mrs. Perkins at the front, Tom Baxter at her elbow, each nodding their silent oath. Drake's lip curled. Empty promises, he spat, flicking water from the book. He raised a hand, pistol aiming at Hannah's chest. Jonah's shot rang true, a warning plume of dust at Drake's boot. Drake staggered back, momentary shock splintering his mask. Caleb rose, rifle steady across his shoulder. Back off, he growled, voice rippling through rain. This is our home. Drake second fired, barrel cracking in the gray dawn. Tom dropped to one knee, rifle in hand, defending Jonah's flank. Mrs. Perkins pressed against the cabin door, lantern high to blind the attackers. Hannah steeled herself, unfolding the quilt's rose-patched square. She held the fabric aloft, small as a shield before the storm. Levi nestled against the soft cotton, tiny fist clutching the rose patch. In that gesture lay every promise. Her sister's vow, her husband's final word, her children's future. She raised her chin. We can't be driven off land bound by our labor, she called, voice carrying above thunder. A hush fell as Drake and his men took measure of the farmhouse circle ringed by blood and bond. Rancher, cook, sons, and community united. The judge's summons lay at Drake's belt, inked with Caldwell's seal. Drake tore it free and pressed it into Caleb's hands, rain spattering paper like tears. Caleb unfolded the writ and read the statute. Debts over 5 years lapsed under frontier law. He looked at Tom Baxter, who tipped his hat. "We file that claim," Tom said, voice low. He handed Caleb a stamped affidavit from the county clerk. Mrs. Perkins produced another, Caldwell's own endorsement, void for misapplication of fees. Each document folded into the ledger's spine formed a fortress against usurpation. Jonah advanced, pistol aimed at Drake's gut. The hired guns exchanged glances, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. One spat, "We ain't leaving empty-handed." He leveled his rifle at Levi's quilted cradle. In a heartbeat, Caleb raised his voice. "You threaten a child, you answer to me." His rifle barked, a warning shot that shattered the night's brutal calm. Drake's men staggered back, rain pounding their retreat. One dropped the ledger and hustled the saddle, boots slipping in mud. Torque of authority cracked across the ridge as the creditor's men beat dust from stirrups and galloped into dawn's gray edge. When the final hoofbeat faded, Caleb lowered his rifle and exhaled. Thunder rolled through his bones, but relief bloomed like new leaves. He crossed a Hannah and kneeled beside the quilt. Levi reached for Caleb's hat, tiny fingers curling around brim slick. Jonah slid from the corral, mud encrusted on his boots, and joined them. In the hush of wet cedar and spent gunpowder, Hannah wrapped the quilt around all three, mother, father, sons, binding them closer than blood. Later, Mrs. Perkins and Tom gathered at the porch, offering biscuits and fresh coffee in cracked enamel. Neighbors drifted in, each bearing evidence of solidarity. Extra cordwood, salted pork, jars of molasses. Hannah and Caleb shared a silent glance. Community's embrace heavier than any debt. In that moment, the ledger smudged lines and the quilt's frayed stitches wove together into a tapestry of chosen family and survival. 1 year later, dawn spilled gold across amber fields where corn swayed in sunrise light. Hannah stepped onto the porch with Levi toddling at her heels, eyes bright as morning dew. Jonah leaned on the newly mended fence, rifle now a symbol of protection, not fear. Caleb emerged from the barn, weather hat in hand, muscles relaxed beneath a clear sky. They gathered beneath the cedar where Caleb and Hannah once braced the last stand. Caleb knelt and pressed her initials into the post, H+C+J+L, deep in the grain, carving permanence. Hannah placed a bluebonnet sprig in the notch above the letters, petals fresh as hope, then ran her fingers over the rose-patch quilt draped on the rail. Levi tugged at her skirt, pointing toward the horizon, where cattle dotted emerald green pastures. Inside, the hearth glowed with new life. A quilt of vibrant scraps covered the bunkhouse beds, each square a testament to healing hands. On the mantel, Caleb's locket shone polished. Framed portrait of Hannah's sister reunited with memory. Hannah stirred stew for breakfast, its aroma weaving through cedar walls, inviting laughter and gratitude. Jonah carried eggs from the coop, chest swollen with purpose. Levi pressed dough with clumsy thumbs, biscuit shapes blooming under his gaze. Beyond the ranch gates, Mrs. Perkins waved from her wagon, a basket of fresh bread in hand. Tom Baxter rode by with a grin, offering news of spring calves. The creditor's threat lay buried in old logs, a distant echo beneath the pasture's hum. Hannah and Caleb stood in the doorframe as Levi raced into Jonah's arms. Sunrise gilded their silhouettes. Widow and rancher, sons and community, chosen family rooted deep in red clay and resilience. In that final light, the quilt, the locket, and the carved cedar sang a promise. No storm, no debt, no shadow could break the bond they forged on Lonely Ridge.